everyday lives of the people, to show the lived realities of the people. So when you look at the finance bill, which was designed to pursue revenue creation within the Kenyan jurisdiction, it meant that people had to understand it. And for people to understand it, they needed to break it down in a way that you're able to see how those taxes affect people's daily lives. So in that process, you're able to see that there's some kind of urgency and there's some kind of relevance. Then people are able to pick it up and then look for ways to think about change. So based on that question that you've just asked on action oriented, you notice that there's a link there that's coming from urgency that has been built. The message is showing why the issue matters now and how it's connected to people's daily lives. And then now you'll notice the action comes in when people are now picking it up and trying to advocate for change. But the message in itself also tries to show that things need to change. And then the idea of legitimacy and credibility is very important as well in this conversation. We have to ground our messages in evidence. If today I told you many people are unwell, you'll always ask many people, what is that quantifier and where are you getting it from? But if I told you 60% of people in a particular area are undergoing healthcare problems because of, let's say, water and sanitation hygiene, you would be more interested to know. But I also have to ask, what is my evidence base that's showing that for it to be credible? But it also has to be anchored on community voices, the community that you're trying to amplify. What are they saying about that issue? Or are you the only one who's trying to say that, oh, there's this problem happening in this particular country? But if your community voices are not clear there, then it becomes an interesting challenge. And it also has to be, you have to be trusted when you're putting this message. So as an advocacy communicator, you have to create a point where you're trusted by the people you're intending to share that message so that they're able to relate with the process. And then the other thing that sets it apart from general communications is that it connects local realities to bigger systems. Now, it's about lifting individual or community experiences into national, regional, and global policy conversations. So there's an interesting concept that we talk about, and that's systems change. If you're looking at advocacy, you're trying to change something. So it's attached to a system. It means that there are processes there are so many things involved. And at that point, it means that whatever the reality is, it has to be linked to a bigger system that needs to change that process for people to be comfortable. Then there's driving sustained engagement. General communications could be a one-time thing to probably promote something or just quickly share something. But advocacy communications happens over a pretty prolonged period of time. That's why you see campaigns within the development space could be 30 days, 60 days, 90 days. Sometimes the same message could be shared for a whole year or 2 years. Strategies change, but messages remain the same in that process. So it's about listening to what the people you seek to benefit are saying, framing the message, amplifying it, and then mobilizing people for change. So you hear the voices of most affected, frame their experiences into powerful narratives based on the kind of change you're trying to make, and then amplifying them through very strategic channels. And lastly, mobilizing key stakeholders towards change. Stakeholders change depending on who exactly you're trying to influence. I hope we're together until there. So we can see the blue here on my slides are the anchors of advocacy communication. That's narrative building, which means that the biggest thing we need to change is narratives. Okay, so one thing about advocacy communications is that we need to shift perceptions. What do people think about an issue? How do we frame an issue? If education is underfunded, how do we frame it so that people can know it's actually an urgent matter? So we can say, and the media always get this right when it comes to narrative building. If they tell you that people are unable to access a thing, they always have an evidence base around it. They always have some data around it. And so they frame the issue in a way that even you are able to buy in the process. And how do we go about this? You've heard of interesting concepts. You've heard about storytelling, which is very popular right now. And storytelling comes in very interesting ways because people end up talking about these issues. You've heard about using metaphors. You've had people coming up with different concepts to just show you this is what we think about the issue, and humanizing data and saying 60%. So, what does 60% mean to a person in a particular area? Then, the second part, which is very popular about advocacy communications, is program and project visibility. If you're implementing any kind of project, okay, and projects can be different in any kind of context, depending on the sector that you're benefiting. So if I'm in an area such as finance and I'm working on something about medium and small enterprise inclusion, and I'm trying to design programs around it, I'm trying to design activities like training people in a particular area. I'm trying to do something like financial access and trying to connect people to banks. I want people to see about this. What does that mean? I need some kind of attention around the work that I'm doing. And that's what visibility is all about. Making people see the work that you do, understand what it's about. And this is how it happens. It happens in the form of case studies. For example, in Kenya, if I'm thinking about Nairobi, maybe I've brought about 100 people together, and I'll say this project has been able to bring about 100 people together in Nairobi to understand what financial inclusion means for them. It's all about bringing that. There's the idea of success stories. Maybe at the beginning, I started with 100 people, and one person has been able to access a bank. I'm supposed to package that in a way that shows my program is actually successful. And lastly is the idea of visual content. I think the UN has been very popular in doing this very well because they look for different ways to share visual content that brings out their project visibility very well. To say, we have a program on water and sanitation hygiene, we have a program on crime, we have a program on gender, we have a program in all of that. And we've seen that also in civil society organizations within our countries, right? And then now the third thing is the thing we were talking about, systems change. Systems change is about influencing institutions and thinking about long-term policies and processes. So there's so many things that are tied to this whole process. It means that if we begin at the community level, we need to see change at the local level. We need to see change at the national level. We need to see change at the regional level, and then we need to go all the way to the global level. So there's a system we're going through. Even within an organization, there are so many systems we have to go through. We move all the way from administration, we move to programs, we move to communications, move to whatever it is. And that's the idea of a system. We're thinking about it in a way that we're making change across all the points that exist. So what are the three parts that we need to think about when having conversation around advocacy communications? But as I continue, again, please feel free to use the chat to interject if you need me to move slowly or share something differently. Now, these three strategies are what you always have to remember the most out of this entire presentation. I mean, please make sure you remember everything else, but this is a very important part to think about. The purpose of advocacy communications is really threefold. One is the idea of education and outreach. If you intend to pursue communications and advocacy communications, policy communications, or whatever you need to call it, the first step is that you're educating and you're trying to reach out to people. Okay, so this means that you need to simplify issues. So in this presentation, you'll see that I've written policy a lot because it's the area in which we operate with regard to advocacy communications. But when it comes to any other area, issues. Apologies. So simplify issues into relatable content. It could be frequently asked questions. It could be explainer videos. It could be an infographic. It could be a data graphic. It could be a research paper, whichever it is. But you always have to know that you're teaching and you're reaching out to people. You can go to schools, you can go use the radio, you can use grassroots platforms, whichever you choose. But one part of it is you have to be educating and outreaching to different people. The second part is the concept of movement building. This always happens in terms of social mobilization. A lot of times this happens at the physical level. And the other part is digital mobilization, where we use a lot of social media. We've seen hashtags. We've seen hashtags me too. We've seen hashtags you tell me, by the way, by writing on the chat. So many hashtags that you've come across. And sometimes these are used to mobilize people. It could even be something as simple as talking about the different kinds of chocolates we have in our countries or different kinds of coffees and things like that. But hashtags have been very useful in coining things because it allows people to pick it, retweet, share, find ways to engage. We've also seen things like online petitions coming up. Online petitions have been happening very usefully, especially if you're trying to mobilize people like government. So you come up with a petition to say, this is the problem we have, and we actually need you to hear what's happening. You can mobilize people around it and make sure that they're able to sign the petition, for example. We've seen this around issues to do with taxation. We've seen this around issues to do with gender. We've seen this to do with issues to do with youth inclusion. It's include us as young people, include these groups of people. And people have put out petitions for so many things. Sometimes even when there are bills and things that don't relate, you write and say, we want better political representation. We want all these kind of things, and get people to sign it. So petitions have been very common within the development space because you're able to rally very many organizations to come together and share this whole thing. Another interesting thing, we've seen TikTok and IG Reels. You've seen nowadays, people are trying to break down concepts through videos and few concepts here and there. The social mobilization part of this process has also happened through town halls. I don't know how it happens in different countries, but I know in countries such as Kenya, South Sudan, Tanzania, there are normally things like barazas. There are normally things like communities just coming together in certain circles to talk about issues. Sometimes it happens even at the urban settings. It happens within the rural settings. But in the process, as people keep coming for those sessions, you're building a movement. You're building advocates for a particular cause and issues like that. On the digital side, we've seen Twitter and X Spaces coming up, IG Live. There's so many things that come up. Here we're using the Zoho platform. This could end up being a very important movement. And Sharon, you're creating a very good movement in this process. So that way, we're able to come together a lot and say, we're building a movement. So that's the second part of it. And the last part of it is centering lived realities. Now, this one, I've seen everybody talk a lot about it, where people can talk about using voices. Voices of who? Could be community, voices of your specific population that you're trying to influence. You can use this within campaigns, you can use this within different sharing points. And this can happen through participatory storytelling, where you bring different people together and you pick their stories together. It can be through testimonials, people saying how they've benefited with things. And the third part is, testimony, grassroots media and things like that, which have been useful in this conversation. So as I keep having this conversation, I can see a few questions coming in. And I'll begin with a question that has been asked by my Khalid, specifically on what is the difference between anchors and the three parts of centering realities. So when you look at the anchors at the top, so anchors are the things that are just forming the main part of this whole conversation, okay? And then the three parts with the strategies are things that we end up doing in the whole process. So sometimes the anchors are very useful because you're trying to build narratives. You're trying to ensure visibility. You're trying to ensure systems change. That is the main overarching goal of this whole process. But the three parts with strategies are how we get into those anchors. So for me to move towards narrative building, I have to pursue some kind of education and outreach. I have to pursue some kind of centering lived realities. I have to pursue some kind of movement building, right? For me to pursue some kind of program or project visibility, I have to do the same as well. I have to do some kind of education for people to understand the program that I'm implementing. I have to pursue some kind of outreach for people to see this program as much as possible. I also have to pursue some kind of movement building depending on the nature of my program. If I'm doing education, I have to bring together education advocates. If I'm doing anything of the sort, I have to do that. And then systems change, which means that I have to influence a particular institution. So if I'm fighting for education outcomes, I have to be thinking about systems change within that whole value chain. How do I reach out to people like ministries of education? How do I reach out to individuals? How do I try to influence enrollment? How do I try to influence things like transition? See? And then again, centering lived realities also comes because we say, this is how people feel about the system. This is what they think about it. So that part at the bottom in yellow tells you how we achieve the anchors that are at the top. Okay. So there are times you might be pursuing these anchors in blue, one by one, depending on your context, but there are also times when you have to pursue all the three of them at the same time. I hope that has been able to be clear. I'm my Khalid. If at any point it is not clear, please feel free to let me know. I'm trying to look through the chat and I hope Sharon you'll be able to help me as well as we go through any questions. I've seen another question asking, hope they can have the slide. For sure you will at any point. An interesting question here has come up. Is advocacy the same as lobbying? And I want to throw it back to all of you and hear what some people have to say about this. And Sharon, I don't know, should I start with you? Probably hear what you might have to say. Do you think that advocacy is the same as lobbying? Use the chat and mute anything of the sort so that we can have a conversation. Hi, can you hear me?
Hey, yes, we can hear you. We can hear you.
Is advocacy as lobbying? What do we think?
I don't think it's the same.
Mm-hmm.
I think lobbying involves a specific form of advocacy, which maybe sort of focused directly on influencing a policy through maybe a formal engagement. Maybe when it comes to government or legislative, I'm not really good at this, but you'll tell me.
That's okay.
But advocacy, it's wider, and then it is sort of arguing in favor of of a particular cause or an idea.
Okay. I can see Tim Patrick saying lobbying is part of advocacy. Only lobbying is engaging for legislative or policy change. Okay.
Yeah, I can also see a hand.
Yes. Please let them engage. Yeah.
Yeah, sure. You can go on and turn on your mic. Alichenu.
Yeah, from my understanding, I think the both concepts work hand in hand. You can use them interchangeably because if you are advocating for something, and since is based on influencing people, you need people who you can influence, and before you influence them, you have to lobby them to abide with that your idea that you are trying to sell to them. I think that's what I understand from the two concepts.
Yes, you're actually absolutely right. I can see other hands as well. Please feel free to unmute and tell us what you think. So maybe we can start with Jacqueline and then
Yeah.
Brian. Mhm. Hi, Jacqueline. You can proceed. Okay. Brian? Okay.
Maybe Jackie can
Yeah.
try talking right now. I've allowed her mic.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah. Jackie, you can go ahead.
Oh, okay. Hi, everyone. For me, from my understanding, I think lobbying is just a subset, like it's just a part of advocacy.
Mhm.
Only that lobbying will be focusing on maybe something specific or maybe a specific group. But for advocacy is more of raising awareness or educating masses and people. But then when it comes to lobbying, you want the people that you're addressing to take an action or to amend some law. So I think it's almost they're in the same category of advocacy. But yeah, so for advocacy it will be focusing on mainly raising awareness and education and all that. But lobbying, you are addressing specific people because you want them to take to make an amendment on something or act on something or block some laws from being implemented or policies and budgets or something like that.
Great. This seems to be a very interesting aspect, actually. Thank you, Jacqueline. Brian, are you able to unmute? Brian? Hello?
Yes, we can hear you, Brian. Go ahead.
Okay.
Seems like we can't really hear Brian clearly.
Yeah.
I don't know if you
Okay,
can
that's
hear.
fine. Maybe we can
Yeah.
try pick other people as he tries to like redo it, yeah?
You can pick Maria. Maria can go ahead.
Hi guys. I
Hi.
ac- I actually do agree with what people who have spoken before me. I actually think lobbying is a process in advocacy. So as we call the stakeholder to action, the act of us trying to
Mm,
um project visibility, maybe through the videos that we push out to them. So whatever, all that we're doing is a process towards influencing policy change. So I feel like lobbying is a process inside advocacy communication.
Okay, okay. I like that perspective. Kevin?
Yes, thank you. I think they overlap. They are not the same entirely. Advocacy is broader. It's all about raising an awareness and shaping public opinion and influencing decision makers. Whereas when you look at lobbying, it's a bit narrower.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you for that.
Can I maybe give a scenario before you proceed, and then we can highlight, we can determine whether that is lobbying or it's advocacy. Can I go ahead?
Yes, please go ahead.
Okay. Assuming I'm running a public campaign to highlight the importance of clean energy access, that is scenario one. And scenario two, I am meeting with MPs to push for tax incentives on renewable energy products. Between the two, which one is lobbying and which one is advocacy? The first one is that I am running a public campaign to highlight the importance of clean energy access. And scenario 2, I am meeting with MPs to push for tax incentives on renewable energy products. One of them is our advocacy, and the other one is lobbying.
Okay. Okay. In fact, that I think that would be a very good assignment to like make sure everybody has, because we're still gonna go back to this conversation as we keep having this. So I'm going to answer this question. Please note, if your hand is up, please note that I'm not blocking you out because we're still going to come back to this conversation again. But I just want to use a quote that has come here on the chat, specifically from Olude Ochola. He says, all lobbying is a type of advocacy, but not all advocacy is lobbying. And that's where this conversation should really begin. And again, there's another one that says advocacy is trying to get people to take care about an issue, and lobbying is talking directly to lawmakers to pass a specific law. So now, when we think about, so the key difference between these two concepts is that advocacy is a broad term that talks about action taken to support, recommend, or raise awareness about a cause, idea, policy, or some different kind of element that you're working around, right? Now, lobbying is narrower in focus because it's trying to influence some kind of legislation or government decisions by communicating with lawmakers or public officials. So, and sometimes this has also been used informally, lobbying, which is sometimes also used within fundraising. When you're trying to speak a lot to the people who are influencing decisions within a particular space in order to get some kind of buy-in. That's what lobbying is about. But you see, advocacy is broader because it takes into consideration the three parts that we've been trying to put together in this conversation, all the way from education and outreach, movement building, centering lived realities. All these things are intersecting in the process. So lobbying is a very small portion of advocacy in general. Okay, I hope we've been able to get that a bit clearly, but I really like the example that Jacqueline has been able to put here. Running a public campaign to highlight the importance of clean energy access. You'll notice that this campaign, as example 1, can be categorized as advocacy because it will have these three parts in yellow that we were talking about. Education and outreach will come there because you're trying to tell people what clean energy access is about, and you're trying to break it down in concepts that they understand. The other part is movement building, depending on whether you want a physical campaign or a digital campaign. So literally trying to bring people together and saying, we want people to come together and champion clean energy access. And then now the other part is now centering the lived realities where you'll find yourself trying to get stories from people who've experienced challenges to do with energy access, the impact of all this whole process, and it becomes a fully fledged cycle of advocacy. In the process, again, as we keep pursuing this kind of strategies, your program becomes visible, you're advocating for systems change in the process, and your narrative building. Now, example 2 that she's been able to bring out about meeting with MPs to push for tax incentives on renewable energy products, will come now with the concept of lobbying. You'll be trying to get parliamentary caucus on energy, you'll be trying to get minister of energy, you'll be trying to get all these kind of individuals, and you'll be trying to have some kind of back and forth with them until they're able to have some kind of buy-in to your idea. Now, this will require a lot of entry points, a lot of engagements and things like that, right? I hope we've been able to understand that concept until there. I'll look for a few more examples to give you so that we can understand this a bit closely as we keep going. But Sharon, if you're able, please move to the next slide. Okay, now this is a very interesting checklist. Yeah, there are things you need to always ask yourself when thinking about the advocacy communications blueprint. So where do you start? Where do you end? How do you try and do this kind of things? And they're just normally about 9 things. So sometimes it comes in the form of a template. Sometimes it comes in the form of an Excel sheet. Sometimes it comes in the form of just a general Google document. You always define it according to your specific area. For the policy space, we've always tried to design certain templates that are aligned to specific policies that we're trying to influence. For other spaces, it changes as well. But the template has to always have these 9 specific things you need to look for. Now, I always say in anything that you do, you always have to define your North Star. And your North Star is what gives you direction in this whole conversation. So, what exactly is the problem that you're trying to solve? That's the first question you have to ask yourself. And in defining your North Star, there's an interesting resource that you can always find online. It's called an advocacy canvas. Now, that advocacy canvas, even if you Google right now, you'll be able to see it. Just type on Google advocacy canvas and then check images. You'll see it right there. It has some kind of table that where you're able to define your goal, your tactic, how you want to get there, what funding you need, what people you need to talk to, and things like that. And it helps you a lot with this whole process of defining what your advocacy communications is going to look like. Now, second is who's your audience? There's this interesting stakeholder matrix where people do influence, power, and all that kind of stuff. Who are your decision makers? Who are your allies? Who are the neutral actors in this process? Who are you bringing on board? Who do you need to engage? Now, who you engage is very important because it determines the kind of message that you're going to give. You'll notice that sometimes how government communicates is different from how people at the grassroots levels communicate, right? That means that you have to tailor your messaging to match how they engage in order for them to receive your messages and engage with you closely. And now, after knowing your audience, now this is the message which we're talking about, tailoring the tone, tailoring the language. If at any point I am in Kenya, you'll notice that I'll speak in English, I'll break it down in Kiswahili. If I'm in countries like South Sudan, I'll speak in English, yes, but I'll also break it down into Arabic and other vernacular languages. If I'm in Cameroon, in fact, my focal point will be French, and then I will now break it down to English and other dimensions. In Morocco, my focal point will be Arabic and French. In Nigeria, English, and then breaking it down to other languages. So it changes according to the audience that you've been able to map. Then the channels that you're going to communicate this message through is important. Do you want it to go through digital channels? Do you want it to go through traditional channels? Or do you want a mix of both? So you decide that as you keep having this conversation. And then partnerships and amplifiers. Who can multiply your reach? And you see, here is where we think about, if I'm trying to build a brand, influencers are very important people. Why? Because they'll amplify my message. If I'm trying to share a message, I could get the permanent secretary within a particular ministry to share it for me because it's going to be more receptive and people are going to know more about it. A lot of amplifiers that we all know about is the media. They'll always share messages as much as possible and try to get you to the next place that you need to go. Next is very important. It's timing and context. And you need to always have an advocacy calendar. So here I've written policy calendar because it could change according to context. But what it's really called is an advocacy calendar. What does this advocacy calendar have? It has global days. You've seen people celebrate International Day of Democracy. You've seen people celebrate International Day for Education, International Day for name it there in the chat, but we've seen so many international days for healthcare, for women rights, things like this have been coming up. You need to always have those because you're always able to share things across that and tailor them. Then political moments are also very important. How do your governments engage in this process and how can they influence the process? Within the development space, government is always important because they're the ones who make certain decisions around development priorities. So whether you're in the energy sector, whether you are in the education sector, whether in the healthcare sector or anything of the sort, any goal that you need to achieve is a lot of times centered to key actors such as government, key actors such as institutions like education centers, and all of these. The other part is resourcing. And this is now the money question. But beyond the money question, there's elements of tools that you need. Do you need to use Canva? Do you need to use Zoho? What do you need to use in this process? It's important. What technical expertise do you need? Do you need a researcher to help you find the data? Do you need someone to validate it? It's critical. And then volunteer networks are also very important in this process. I think volunteers have been very useful in trying to make sure that we're able to put out things faster, bring people together, and try to maximize reach. The last two elements are things you always have to think about with other partners within your team. One is risk management. You should anticipate backlash sometimes, and it happens, and that helps you design ways to mitigate that. We've seen this like even in peace and security contexts a lot. If I'm going to say that person X should go, what are the chances that there are other people who support it? It happens a lot, by the way, in different contexts. Because also, even beyond that, is to think about misinformation. It could happen because there are other people who could come in and actually misinform away from your cause. And then impact tracking is important because it helps you with reporting. What indicators are you tracking? If you're doing a digital campaign, one of the biggest things you want to see is engagement. You want to see reach and things like that. You want to see policy mentions. If you wrote a petition to government and they're doing a bill process or an act, you want to see that mentioned in the final document. If you see commitments by the UN, by whoever it is, and they're saying, oh, actually, we're going to contribute $10,000 to this particular cause, you want to see that follow through of that commitment all through. So that has to be part of this whole entire conversation. Next slide. Okay, so Sharon, this was supposed to have a few quick messages. I think we can just move backwards as I trace them. But again, I'm going to open up space for questions as I just get you all these particular messages. So the floor is open, but interesting enough, I'm seeing something here that Kingdom has said. For lobbying, I found it interesting. You've already been saving an interest group. You will be like, you are updating the group on new features, maybe on your products. Very late to being alert on maybe vagaries of weather linked to casual effect relationship, especially on danger. Okay, I get that. And like the thing with lobbying is that there's always a particular interest group that you're trying to champion. And those are the people you end up having a lot of back and forth with in order to engage and understand. So ideally, within the framework of guiding the messages is you have to always understand the message, the urgency, the relevance, and where exactly you want. And in that process, sorry, just a minute, let me get this. However, please note that the floor is open for you to ask any questions that you may need to ask. So, as I now open up the floor, and I'm just about to now stop presenting so that we can have a chat, is I'll give you examples. So message one, sorry, let me turn back my video on. Message one, we launched a program on tax justice with 50 young leaders. Okay, I hope you've been able to get that. Message two, we urge Parliament to pass progressive tax reforms so young people aren't overburdened while corporations pay their fair share. Which is general communications and which one is advocacy communications? Let me try and write them here on the chat as well. Example 1. With 50 young people. Tax reforms, so young people.
It's now on. The slides, I think it's okay now. You can check.
Okay, that's fine. I think you can just look at that example that I've put in the chat. I'll try to add a few more as well.
Okay. All right.
There, so everybody can find a way to tell us which one is general and which one is advocacy comms. Okay, but
Okay.
I think Sharon, at this point, we can just open up conversation on any
Yeah,
kind
sure.
of people have, because this was just
Mm.
really just centering it in terms of the key areas to look out for, the checklist and
Okay.
craft pages. Yes.
All right. Thank you. Thank you so much. That was amazing. I'm just telling my colleague here, we really needed this. We really needed someone to remind us the right direction to doing this. Thank you so much. That was really amazing. And I don't know whether these are old hands or new hands. Kevin, do you still want to say something? And Maria Jones and Brian? If you still want to, I'll just lower your hands. If you still want to say something, you can raise your hands again. Okay, let me just do that. Okay, if you still want to talk, you can still raise your hands again. So yes, amazing. I can see Thomas, I can see Hannah. So maybe we can start with Maria Jones, and then we can go to, yes.
Thank you so much. I don't know why I'm still stuck on lobbying,
Okay.
but I feel like um, if I have started the process of advocacy communication, and my end goal is, which is what you had said before, policy change. I feel like lobbying is still part of, the drive, is still part of the advocacy, because at the end of the day, what we are fighting for is policy change for whatever groups of people we are advocating for. I don't know. I'm still stuck there.
Okay, so as we keep having the conversation, actually, you're not stuck. You've gotten it absolutely right. Because what we are saying, lobbying is part of advocacy, right? But not all advocacy is lobbying, because there are times when advocacy doesn't always get to the point of lobbying. It could be separated, right? But lobbying sometimes is a strategy for change. In fact, I think that's a better word to use. Lobbying is a strategy for change. And it's one of the things that are incorporated within advocacy. So if at all today I decide that I want a certain interest group, such as government, to create the change that I want, it means that one of the strategies I'm going to put together is lobbying. Okay. And if my interest group changes and it becomes communities, you'll notice that my advocacy strategy at one point will find itself changing to either possibly be something like storytelling, community dialogue, things like that. The strategy will change according to the kind of interest group that you have. Lobbying has been very popular with interest groups such as governments, private sector, philanthropic organizations, multinational corporations, and entities like that. Because now, depending on the bureaucratic frameworks that they have, you have to have some kind of push and pull over and over so that you can get to them. I hope that has been able to be slightly clear.
Yes, thank you so much.
Okay.
All right. I can also see Jackie's hand. Oh, there was Thomas before Jackie. And then we can go to Jackie. Thomas?
Hi, please, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, so I want to ask like about two questions so far. So my first question is,
Yeah.
in your advocacy work or maybe in coming up with your advocacy campaign, does place really matters? Like in crafting your advocacy campaign, like is it really matters to also identify like, so for example, maybe the thing that I am advocacy for, like maybe let me use Ghana as an example because that's where I'm coming from. So in our northern part of Ghana, there's this adage that most of our ladies like they don't like going to school or something like that. They find it difficult to attend school because of how difficulties like financial challenges and a whole lot of things. So if I am advocating for school building or maybe a scholarship for females, that like that place really matters in this case. Like, so should I consider the northern part of Ghana where it's really a challenge for them, or I should just go to any part of Ghana here and start my advocacy work? That is my first question. So should I go ahead with my question?
Okay, I think you can ask both questions. Sorry, you said should place matter. Did I get that
Yes,
right? Okay.
yes.
Okay. You can just ask the second one so that I respond together.
Okay, so my second question is, I want to also find out like, is it also important to use the Daventa power box when you are working on your advocacy work? So, for example, like we have what we call the visible powers. We have the visible powers, which includes the government and also any high institution. So we also have the hidden powers, that is the foreign institutions or maybe just such like IMF, the World Bank, and those people, like the foreign people that have influence. So those fall under the hidden powers. Then we also what we call the invisible powers, but they are there, but we can't see them that much. Then so I'm also asking, like in this case, when you are running your advocacy campaign, like is it important to follow all these steps or just follow what you are just telling us today? I'm just asking this. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much. So what I'll do, Sharon, maybe we can take three questions, three people at a time.
Yes, sure.
Yes.
Okay, so I think I can go to for me.
Hi, everybody. Hi, can you hear me?
Hey, yes, we can hear you loud and clear.
Mine is not really like a question, it's just a bit of a contribution, especially in the area of lobbying. So I'll say lobbying is a form of advocacy, and that statement that all advocacy cannot be lobbying, that statement is actually right. But lobbying is a form of advocacy and is one of the tactics used in advocacy. And you do lobbying, especially when you want to have effect on policies that has to do with like laws to be passed. So like in Nigeria, where I live, when we passed laws for gender-based violence and stuff, so they had to do a lot of lobbying to be able to get some of these laws to be passed. So like you have laws for GBV, you have your laws for the girl child, and some of all these laws you have in your society actually as a result of lobbying as a form of advocacy too. So I hope the person that was a bit confused about policy, about lobbying and advocacy, you understand. So lobbying is one of the tactics used in advocacy for a broader perspective, which is to change the law in favor of a situation or a group of people or circumstances in the society. Thank you.
Amazing, amazing. Thank you so much, Fumi. Fumi is one of our speakers. I know you're going to meet her very soon in the next sessions. And thank you so much, Fumi, for bringing your insights. Lurit, should I take one more or we answer those ones first?
Yes, we can have one more.
All right. Brian, are you able to speak now? You can just unmute and speak. If not, you can just share your question in the chat. Okay, I can see you're unmuted, but I can't hear what you're saying. So please, you can just write your question in the Q&A session. And as you do that, I can ask Maria to say something, to ask the question. Maria.
Oh, sorry. I had already said.
Amazing. Ale. Okay, thank you. So Ale Chenu.
Yeah. Good evening. Like for advocacy and influence, I think for the context where like I'll a little bit confused, like a country like Nigeria with much more vitalized ethnicity, and from this context, I think here for us to advocate for something, basically your audience number one, and when you targeted the audience, who are your allied, and your ally, you need to lobby them for them to send your message across to where you want it. So that point now, I'm still confused on that, on the area of influence and the advocates, because if we are advocating for something here, we need to first lobby and send the message out. I think for this, so I don't know.
Okay.
All right.
I think what I like the most about this conversation is that we're starting to think a lot about strategies, context, and what is happening within our respective countries. And the message that just came, the last question, and the message that came from the previous speaker about lobbying, I think those two need to be tied together. Lobbying is a very critical tactic that we use, and it depends on what exactly your advocacy ask is. What is your cause? How are you trying to do this kind of work? What are you championing? So that's what determines. And also, your specific interest groups determine that as well. So amplification of the message sometimes does not have to always go hand in hand with lobbying. Because in this case, why am I saying this? Because there are times when you lobby, but you won't find yourself amplifying the message. And that's what happens within closed door negotiations. If you find yourself in a closed room, lobbying will still take place, but sometimes you won't find yourself broadcasting the message as strongly as possible. But there are times when you are in an open negotiation where amplifying the message is one strategy that comes very strongly, and lobbying at the same time. So they happen concurrently, right? So it's important to think about that as we keep having the conversation. And then I want to go to the question by Thomas. So Ghana, for example, does location matter? Location matters because it ties hand in hand to the kind of impact that you want to make. Now, location matters in terms of where are you to influence. Sorry, Manuel. Okay, now let's get back to it again. So location does really matter in this conversation. in terms of where are you trying to influence. So if, for example, using your example, you're trying to advocate for schools to be built in the northern region, that's where your advocacy is going to be influencing. However, your allies, your stakeholders can come from different parts of Ghana. I'll give you an example. Very recently, we were actually in Ghana for engagement around public debt, and we did a rally in the entire process. I was one of the participants of that entire rally. Now, this particular advocacy is designed for the whole of Africa. But because we were convening in Ghana, Ghana was the most immediate place that we could come together. But we had to find a way to make sure that the advocacy messages are shared even broader. And I'll refer you to this organization, which is called the African Forum and Network in Debt and Development, which does advocacy in this frontier across different countries. But location matters in terms of what is happening there at that particular time, how is it going around. But just because you are in the northern region does not mean that you cannot advocate from the southern or central region. You can do that. You can mobilize as many people as possible so that they're able to provide reach. But always remember that as they do that, it has to always come back to where you're trying to influence. You said you wanted schools in the northern region. Make sure that even if someone is speaking about it in the southern region, they are saying make sure that schools are built in the northern region so that there's no confusion in your advocacy message. The second question about this power influence matrix. It's very important in conversations around advocacy. And this is where even differences between general communications and advocacy communications happens. You need to understand who is the most influential person that will take your message until a point that it actually brings about systems change. And you also need to understand who are the low interest influencers, because there are times when, and we've been very guilty of this at times, when we don't do the power influence matrix and then we end up influencing stakeholders that we did not need to actually engage. So it's important to understand that. And hidden powers are very important to also understand. Because if you don't, you might make headway in your advocacy, and then somebody comes up out of nowhere, and then you realize, wow, I didn't factor this in at some point. So always understand who's the most powerful, who's the least powerful, and what tactics are used for that. But beyond that, try to understand hidden powers so that they do not spoil your advocacy efforts. There's an interesting question I've also seen in the chat, and it's about how do we balance emotional appeal and factual accuracy when crafting advocacy messages. Let me give you a very crazy instance. Imagine you're in a situation where you are handling something like healthcare. And in this case, you're thinking about something like maternal deaths, which are related to pregnancies and things like that. And the hospital is probably neglected. Do you know that it's very easy for you to run through an emotional situation, that whole process? Or you're in a league, like you're trying to champion legal redress, for instance, and the situation is very, very complex and uncomfortable. And in that process, you notice that you cannot even detach the emotional part of it. And this has also been seen in areas where people are feeling like are advocating against gender-based violence or advocating against exclusion of marginalized groups such as refugees and things like that. It's very easy for your emotions to run in this process. But you always have to remember that you're championing for things like human rights. You're championing for things like development. So this means that evidence base has to come first in this whole conversation. So you have to ask yourself, what is the accurate, verifiable data in this conversation? How many people are affected by the problem? Okay. And what are the real world issues around it? And then you see, that's why we say, according to the World Health Organization, 2,000 people have gone through this. According to this, how many people have gone through this. So it becomes okay. 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 All right. And in that process now, we also have to come back and say, humanize the issue. Sometimes humanizing that issue is actually a strength because we say these are problems that people are facing. So you bring out their lived realities. So convert your emotional attachment into a lived reality and say, this is what happened to this person. Is this what we want to be happening to people all through? And so it becomes a strength even in crafting your message. Again, you have to really balance up this whole process. Heart plus head, those two have to come in together. And that has to be backed by statistics and the magnitude of what's going on. So in the process of all of it, remember that as you pursue advocacy communication, remember that we are human in this process. And the human side of it is what informs the lived realities that we're communicating. And that's how we bring people together in the process. But we also have to take care so much that we're not focusing only on the emotional attachment and forgetting the facts that could actually put us at the table where we need to be. Yeah. So I don't know now if there are more hands and people would like to champion a bit more conversation. Okay. Seen another interesting question here by Brian, where he was asking, in advocacy communication, how do you tailor messages for a community consisting of persons with different social, cultural backgrounds? So, first, you need to understand indicators within that group that brings them together. So we normally have two things that bring two things. We have diversities and then we have unifying points. Okay. So if I use places like the East Africa region, sometimes it could be language, sometimes it could be cultural activities, sometimes it could be social economic realities, sometimes it could be the media habits. It could be something that tries to show you that there's a similarity. Okay. Interesting examples is, I think, what can I use here? I'll use an example from the Youth for Tax Justice Network, which is one of the organizations that I'm privileged to support. So the Youth for Tax Justice Network engages youth across the entire African continent. So young people in the North African region are different from young people in the South African region. They're different from the East Africa region, they're different from the Central Africa region, they're different from the West African region. But the demographics that bring them, the things that bring them together, like one, age. For instance, the age 18 to 35 brings them together, which means that by itself means that it helps support the people we're selecting. The second thing that brings them together is their lived realities. Are they affected by issues to do with tax? That means there's a shared problem that they have. So they need to have a shared problem for their advocacy to be as impactful as possible. So the fact that that's a problem means that even if the story is told in French, English, Yoruba, and any other language that exists really within ourselves, Pakistani, Indian, English, Spanish, whatever it is, there's a shared problem. And that means that they're facing the brunt of tax systems. So whenever we put them together in a room, everybody is able to tell their story differently, but they're all coming together to talk about a shared problem. Now, beyond that is the idea of exclusion. Are they excluded from conversations around tax? You can see that as a problem as well. So it means that if you're trying to deal with people across multicultural backgrounds, you have to find points that unify them, points that they face at the same time, And then now this tells you how best you can craft the message and make sure that they're sharing experiences. Because when they're able to have that kind of consensus, advocacy is easier. But if you focus more on diversities and you forget to think about the things that unify them, you find yourself sometimes distorting the message and people may not resonate with it. But also, it's important for you to think about it in a way that you look at the diversities beyond the unifying points, you break down the message further to meet them where they're at. So if in North Africa they're facing a certain problem, try and find some message at least that goes towards them. Try and find a strategy that works for them. So you'll notice that in multicultural backgrounds, there's normally the main kind of advocacy point, and then there's breakaways to at least support people wherever they're at. And that's now what we call stakeholder tailored communication in this whole process. You tailor it according to your stakeholders, but also have the anchor that's telling you what is bringing all of you together. Yes. The contribution as well from Bellboat is well noted in terms of a contribution where lobbying is a strategic effort to influence decisions or policies in favor of a specific cause, interest, or organization, often by conveying information and arguments to key decision makers such as government officials and corporate leaders. I totally agree with that as well, because it's heavily in line with what we've been talking about in this whole process as well. Another question I can see here is, what are the most common pitfalls that you carefully making key steps on an advocacy checklist? So the
ethical challenges in AI. Just a minute. Emmanuel Gona, kindly mute yourself. Okay.
Okay. All right. Are there any common pitfalls when it comes to overlooking steps on an advocacy checklist? Yes, there are. I'm trying to think about this in terms of, if you have not thought about your channels, if you skip your channels, you might find yourself doing it haphazardly. If you do not calculate your steps, you'll find yourself in a situation where you're doing it in a way that's just rapid and you're not able to track the impact in the process. Beyond this is, if you miss something like a power influence matrix, you might find yourself engaging a stakeholder that at a level that you'd have engaged a different one. So there are certain problems that do come with it. I mean, you don't have to always follow it to the T, because you'll find yourself changing it according to your different contexts and things like that. But those things are able to tell you what to pick out and what not to pick out. But overall, it keeps you grounded. The thing about an advocacy checklist I've come to learn is it keeps you grounded. If you have that thing that is guiding you, you can always go back to the drawing board and say, this did not work, so let me try a new strategy. That's really just the advantage of the checklist. But it also tries to give you points to reference every now and then as you go forward. Yes. So Sharon, back to you to open the floor.
Amazing, amazing. Thank you so much, Lurit, for that wonderful presentation. And before I close the session, I can see one hand. I believe Brian's hand is an old hand, but Kevin, do you want to say something? I can see you've raised your hand.
Yes, thank you for having me. Let me start off by saying this was a really insightful session. We really learned a lot. I actually have like 2 questions, but I'll be quick about it. The first one is, we realized that in communities, most affected people by injustice are invisible in platforms where advocacy depends on. How do we then ensure advocacy isn't just about marginalized groups, but also crafted and led by them without tokenism? And the second one is, I've seen around that governments and corporations are becoming skilled at co-opting activist language, turning sustainability or inclusion into PR buzzwords. How do advocates then reclaim and protect the authenticity of their messages in an era of performative communication? Thank you very much.
Right, that's a good one. That's a good one. Maybe we can take one more. Maybe we can take one more. Thank you so much, Kevin, for that. Nothing for us without us. Maybe we can just take one more. Anyone else who has a question before I give the mic back to Lurit? Okay, all right. Maybe you can just answer that as we see if we'll get some other questions. Yeah, back to you. Okay, I can see Khalid. Khalid, you want to ask a question? Please go ahead. My Khalid. If you're speaking, we can't hear you. Or someone can confirm if they're hearing her, because I can. Okay, we can't really hear you. Maybe you can just type in the chat.
Okay, Sharon, maybe I can just come in.
Yeah, sure.
I can really put that together, like really just that. Kevin, thank you so much for that question, because I think the two questions that you've asked are actually the real problems that are happening within the advocacy frontier. Because one is that communities are often our beneficiaries, but we don't even see them anywhere in a lot of these conversations. And it's a real problem. This happens in almost all African countries, and even beyond African countries. It also happens in European countries. Interesting. There's a project we had a few weeks ago, and it was mostly, let's say, okay, not weeks. Okay, weeks is a bit short. About 3 months ago, and this was with the Africa Europe Foundation. The conversation was about making sure that community voices in Africa and Europe are literally heard in this conversation. But the people who are literally in the room by the time we got there were people who are not actually like directly affected by this problem. It's literally the technocrats themselves who are coming to tell us a lot about the challenge that we're having. And so in this process is when now Policy O'Clock even had to think a lot about what civic listening looks like, what community engagement looks like, what civic engagement looks like. Now, in this case, if at all you're advocating for any cause, your beneficiary should be the one telling their story. If you must pursue an editorial, please do so, but retain the original voice of the person who is affected by a particular problem. And this is why we say centering lived realities is very important. And that's why we try and invest in things like showcases, we try and invest in things like conversations around it, but do not ever take away the voice of the person who actually needs to benefit from this entire process. And that's why even processes such as the Commission on the Status of Women, which is happening in New York, there's advocacy to say the people who advocate for really actually bring out the lived realities of these people. So why not bring the community to sit in those rooms and tell their stories as it is? But that's why we've taken to other alternatives. We've used media who try and give room for these stories, community radios particularly. And I'd invite you to check out an organization called Farm Radio International. They do it very well. They say, let communities tell their stories, let them share what exactly is going on. Beyond that is the idea of trying to also break down the conversation according to the challenges that people face. Sometimes communities may not come and tell their stories because they're trying to safeguard their spaces. In this case, it means that you have to create the story to resonate with them. Like, for instance, whenever we're talking about, let me see what would be relevant here, particularly around tax, for instance, we say, if I don't have a job, how will I pay for tax? If you break it down in that sense, that you're able to show the reality that is going on and try and say, this is why people are not participating in the system, you're also able to frame it on behalf of communities but based on the issues that they're generally facing. So the idea is, even as you go out there and you're designing these communication strategies, let it begin by, these are the voices of the people, these are the issues that they're facing, and then now come up as the person designing the message to say, this is why we are advocating for this. So that there's that grounding on prioritizing lived realities in the conversation. Second is the idea of government. Guys, it's not even government alone, it's private sector, it's multinational corporations and all these individuals. They've gotten to a point where we've exposed so much of our advocacy strategies and languages that they have begun to master how to respond to us. And so you don't even know how to gauge whether this is political will supporting your cause, or it could be just a game to make sure that they're trying to manage you. This takes you back to, why are you championing this? Remember the first thing we said about your North Star. What problem are you trying to solve and why are you actually doing it? You have to go back to the drawing board and say, this is why I'm doing it, and so I have to do this. But you also have to be very woke, for lack of a better word, to understand it is at this point that I need to withdraw. It is at this point that I need to be careful. It is at this point that I need to understand what's going on. But you also have to have conditions of engagement. If government wants to engage you, you have to have certain conditions to say, it is at this point that I can no longer engage, at this point that I will continue to engage, and at this point that I will understand the differences. But you also have to have follow-through mechanisms, so that if they commit to you, you have to follow through and say that you committed at this point and document that whole process so that you're able to beat them at their own game. Yes. I think I have attempted as much as possible to answer some of these questions here and there.
Yes.
You can see a question of how can we avoid the harmful advocacy communication, which is important. And I'll answer this from previous projects that we have done with UNESCO on misinformation, malinformation, and disinformation. These are things that live with us. And that means that we have to be resilient. We have to say, fact checking is important in this process. If someone tells you 6,000 people died in a particular cause, you have to go back and check, where are they getting that information from? How are they handling it? Before you ever amplify anything to do with numbers or comment on it, try and just verify. Go back and ask, where is this information coming from? Have they quoted the information? Have they done that kind of stuff? Because nowadays, even when we're engaging media, we've gotten to a point where we ask them, where did you get 50% from? Where did you get 10% from? Who exactly are you using as the thought leader to tell you it's 10% or 15%? You always have to ask those questions, because if you actually get the wrong message, you're literally tarnishing your credibility in the space, and it hurts how you continue pushing for advocacy. Beyond that is to just think about creating alternative messages on your side. If you see something like that coming up, try and study what's going on and things like that, but also conduct your own advocacy. If you're in the health sector and the education sector is facing a particular kind of challenge, try to explore some kind of thought leadership of people within the education sector, so that they're able to help you and you become an amplifier of the message, but not necessarily the core person sharing the message. If you're within a particular sector where you're a thought leader, then you can share. But if you're not a thought leader in a particular space, be very cautious about the kind of things that you're sharing, so that you're avoiding harmful advocacy communications or anything of the sort, because you could end up hurting somebody. About persuading those who don't like to be persuaded, sometimes change takes a very long time. It can take up to 10 years, 20, 50 years and everything, but you have to stay the course. If people don't understand, and I'll give you this as a live example, again with the Youth for Tax Justice Network, because this has been the best place where we have tested and tried most advocacy strategies. So when we started talking about tax, people were like, what is this tax thing? Income tax, I don't know, VAT, I don't know, all this kind of thing. People are wondering, what's this concept? What does it have to do with me as a person? I don't understand it. Things even came up about the United Nations Framework Convention. People are asking, what is that thing? Why does it matter in my life? And so we started with a lot of technical jargon, and then people were not even coming together for these causes. And we started asking them, why are you actually not coming together? And they're like, it's part of day-to-day lives. Tell me. So what we started doing is we started breaking it down according to interesting issues that are affecting them. For example, how they acquire airtime, how content creators face issues to do with digital tax. And they began buying in slowly and slowly and slowly and slowly and coming up. But with time, we realized even if we kept breaking down the concept, we need that user-generated engagement. So we designed something called the Pan-African Creatives Campaign. We told young people, design and explain tax justice according to what you think it should be, according to what you understand. And funny enough, people came up with very interesting concepts. People came up with poems, people came up with songs, people came up with graphics, people came up with data boards, people came up with some drawings, people came up with so many things to a point where we realized actually it's better if people told their own stories. And sometimes, even if people are not being persuaded, you might have to change your strategy, accommodate them. Don't lose the goalpost. Accommodate them, understand where they're coming from and things like that. But try to also bring it to a point where they're also telling the story from their own perspective. Then now that way, you can correct them, or you can teach them, or you can decide what exactly you want to do with it. Yeah, I have attempted again to answer some of your questions. I may not have all the general responses, but strategies change over time. And one thing I'd like you to know as you do this is that strategies, if you test one strategy and it's not working, always have an alternative strategy that you can test. Okay? Feel free to do that as much as possible until you get your goal. If someone is not being persuaded today, go back again tomorrow. And I normally say it's like how we wake up every day with hope for trying to make things work. Make sure that hope is grounded. Wake up, try and find whatever you need to find until it works out. That's really just the best part of this whole process. If the radio doesn't work, try the TV. If the TV doesn't work, try a podcast. If the podcast doesn't work, try and create something. Go to the community yourself and try something out. Okay. But try and remember that people have to tell their stories according to what they best understand, because that's what makes your advocacy impactful. Back to you.
Nice, amazing. I was even thinking of what to add, and I cannot even add anything. But you just mentioned that advocacy takes a lot of time. I remember we were doing a project on making the community embrace women in leadership, and one of the areas we were implementing was in Homa Bay, and it was so hard because for them they're like, women cannot lead. Why are women leading? And I've just remembered that advocacy really takes time, and you should know this, and you should continue doing that. And then also change the strategy. If the strategy you've used is not working, then you can always change the strategy and use another strategy. Before I can see some few more hands, and we have 7 minutes. So just allow me to read one quote, and then I'll open up the questions again, and then we can wrap it up in the next maybe like 10 to 20 minutes. And I just want to read one quote that says, advocacy is not just about raising your voice, it's about making sure it is heard where it matters most. Advocacy is not just about raising your voice, it is about making sure it is heard where it matters the most. Yeah. Right. So I want to give Jacqueline. Jacqueline, you can go ahead.
Hi, I think my hand has been up and down for quite some time, because I really wanted to respond to some of the issues that was raised by our speaker, and I think she has given us very, very detailed information. And if, as a advocacy communications specialist, if you are very keen, then this is a turnaround for us. I really wanted to respond on the guy who asked, sorry if that term offends you, but I really wanted to respond on the person who asked about if place matters. And I was thinking to myself, uh, assuming my organization wants to do advocacy on female genital mutilation here in Kenya, would it really matter? Would it really have the impact it should have if I started doing that in Nairobi, targeting people in Nairobi? Yet we know the areas that are really affected by is it FGM? The areas that are really affected by FGM. So it's very important to note the place, because it is the place and the people in the place that will help you know how to frame the messages. Because again, if you want to communicate to people, you want to sell them to or to create awareness about something. If you go to the Maasai land, for instance, where they still practice FGM, chini ya maji, if for lack of a better word, Sharon will tell you what chini ya maji means. Uh, the people who are really advocating for this, for FGM to continue happening, you'll realize they're actually men, and especially the older ones who are still holding on to those negative cultures, the men and women. So when you start formulating the messages or the advocacy messages that you want to share with these people, you might actually not want to go directly to the people affected. You will want to go to the people who are actually doing, uh, allowing it to happen, because again, when you look at their culture, the men have a bigger voice than the women. So if you go there and you don't go directly to the men, they will not even allow you to speak to their women. So it's very good to be sensitive on the time when you want to communicate your message, and the place that you want to communicate the message, and the people that you're targeting, because again, you want your message to have impact. uh, she also mentioned about involving the community. One thing I've realized in the NGO space, where we have so many NGOs that are advocating for different things, but the one thing that I've come to realize that really affects most of our messages and our advocacy is how we how we involve people. Because some of the policy documents that have been formulated, they are full of jargon, yet the target people who are meant for that, to understand that policy, they're actually the local communities. And that is why, like for instance, in my organization, we delve now into using things like art to simplify this information, to simplify the message so that it relates to them. So it is very key that we involve the community. Let us have them in the boardrooms so that we know if whatever document that we policy document that we are coming up with, or message that we want to create, does it resonate with them, with the community? Does it really make sense to them? Because if it doesn't, then we'll be doing zero work. As Sharon has said in our quote, make sure where it's hard, where it matters. Okay. And try also to bring in now new models and ways of doing advocacy. We have digital advocacy if you want to reach out to the youth. Art is really working for us. Actually, it's simplifying information in and making it very easy for communities to understand. Because if you go do, for instance, a song in Luo, and it's talking about water hyacinth or something, and why it's important that we do this or that with water hyacinth, you see, it relates directly to the community, and the message will get where it's supposed to get to. Again, advocacy is also one of the key things is we want people to change a certain behavior. For instance, social change. It's also communication for social change, if I may use that term. So if you want people to change a certain behavior, we don't use jargons to make them understand, because they will not understand. Find ways, relate, go to the communities themselves, involve them, see where their pains are, and then from there you're able to come up with simpler ways of communicating your message to them. I hope that makes sense. Thank you.
It does, Jacqueline. Thank you. I think next time I'm ever going to have such a conversation, I have to like call you to come with me. But I think it's been wonderful to hear that, because I agree with you 100%. You know, important for everybody to think about that perspective, so that it can help us make sure that we're getting impact at the level that we're supposed to. So Sharon, I don't know if there's anyone else who would want to say anything before I give my final parting shot.
Yes, just one more and then we are done. So I'll just give, I can see two more and then we are done, okay? So Kevin, you can go first, and then we'll have Maria, and then I'll close it at that. Also, as they join, the evaluation link has been sent in the chat, in the Q&A section. Please ensure you fill it before you leave. Thank you very much. So Kevin.
Okay, thank you. This should be my last question, because there's really a lot to unpack in this advocacy space. Many advocacy leaders, they speak of empowerment, yet power is rarely surrendered. What would it take for advocates themselves to be willing to step back and give up control, especially in the NGO space? Thank you.
All right. So, Lurit, I hope you got that right. Okay, so I'll just pick Maria, and then you'll answer both of them together. Maria, you can go ahead.
Okay, thank you so much. You spoke about mitigating the risk. Okay, sorry, let me do that again. You talked about risk management, and this entailed mitigating whatever challenges that you will encounter. And you said that one of the challenges is misinformation, disinformation, and sorry, and malinformation. So I'm pretty sure I'm from Kenya, and I'm pretty sure most people know what happened last year and the beginning of this year. We've had demos that are anti-government because of punitive taxes and bad governance. So when it comes to advocacy, because that is also advocacy, and we are speaking about large numbers of people who are taking part in this advocacy and who are facing such challenges of disinformation and malinformation, how can you mitigate that, given that this is such a wide web? It's like talking about finding something in the ocean. So how can we mitigate that? Because we saw the misinformation and malinformation actually affect how the protests were going, and it totally watered down whatever efforts, because there was about trust issues and misinformation. So how can you mitigate that, especially with such a wide scope?
All right. Thank you very much, Maria, for your question. Lurit, maybe I can just give you a few minutes to answer that, as you also give your parting shot. Thank you.
Okay, Kevin, thank you very much for that question. I hope at one point we're gonna converse even more, since I don't, questions are very interesting, because they're making me even think you know, what advocacy communications really needs to look like in terms of impact. And advocacy leaders need to understand that, yes, they could be leading the space, but they also have to let beneficiaries own the space. And that's why, for me, the biggest thing I've always told people is lived realities. If my work is to say, I represent young people within the bracket of 18 to 24, and I am not within the bracket of 18 to 24, it means that in any advocacy element that I go to, the first people that speak up should be 18 to 24 before I go ahead now and give my frontier. And I think that's really the strategy that has always been working for me, even just as a leader. And I think it's something all of us need to think about. The person you represent, if you do not share the same dynamic, let them begin by sharing their dynamic and then proceed to ground the conversation. And that's the kind of leadership we need to take within advocacy communications at this point. Is, yes, we could be owning these organizations. Yes, we could be gatekeeping space. Yes, we could be doing all these kind of things. But it's important to know that where lived realities are hard, advocacy is way better. Like, it's way better. You know, I hope I've been able to answer that question, Kevin. But I'm happy to open up as much space as possible to have this conversation even further, because it's important to think about it a lot. It's important to even just think about where are we really headed within the advocacy spaces that we engage, because that behavior is what's challenging impact. It's what's challenging how we frame messages. It's challenging how we ensure inclusion in this whole process. So it is actually about time to rethink how we are leading these particular spaces. About risk mitigation, one, you have to do a lot of myth busting, because one thing you'll see is the internet. The internet has almost no regulations. If I wanted to tweet anything today, I would do it, whether it's true or not. It's my space. I'm able to share it. And the thing is, even up to 1 million people are going to see it. But if you're supporting a cause, you have to myth bust. What is the myth and what is the truth? You have to always tell people those things. And sometimes, and I've seen this a lot in people who work within climate. It could be someone would put up a post saying, confirm whether this is a myth or the truth. And sometimes you can even ask people questions, polls, any kind of things like that, and try to tell them to compare. You see, the same way at the beginning, one of our colleagues in the chat that we were having was asking, is example 1 lobbying and is example 2 advocacy? You see, that kind of thing. You have to be innovative about how you're fact checking. Also, the second thing I'll tell you is thought leadership is very important in countering disinformation, malinformation, and misinformation. If a lot of people are saying something wrong about something, you say something right through an article, say something right through a research piece, say something right through a quote, say something right through something. But just make sure that you're bringing the conversation back to where it's supposed to be. Because naturally, we tend to receive messages very differently, but we have to appreciate the fact that thought leadership sometimes is what counters misinformation. Lastly, is to also think a lot about fact-checking processes. Ask around, what do you think? How do you feel about this? Try and get what people are saying about it to also gauge people's perceptions. You'll find yourself coming up with education and awareness advocacy strategies that actually support your mission. And eventually, you're able to create knowledge corners. You're able to create areas where people can actually reference and come back and say, I'll tell you where you can find right information. You see? So try and do that as much as possible. But understand that this is important risk and you have to always find a way to mitigate it. And sometimes the thing about risk is that we can preempt, but sometimes we can find strategies around it, because you can't always prevent all kinds of risks, but you can always find interesting strategies to save you from a problem. Sharon, this is the part where I say the parting shot.
Yeah. Yes, sure. If we would want to have you the whole day, the whole night, because this conversation is stirring our our thinking, and it has been an awesome conversation, and I think we need to have more of this. And I'm thinking to myself, we really need to do more of advocacy communications, because sometimes we want to advocate for something, we miss it. Maybe in the stakeholders. We miss it maybe by not involving the community, and also using the wrong ways of doing the advocacy. And as Jackie has mentioned, I think the art space has really worked well for us when it comes to matters climate. It has really worked out for us well. Music, art, drawing, poetry, and maybe it's just something that other organizations can also embrace. If at all, maybe they are dealing with youths who understand this and would want to do to engage in this. And yeah, so Lurit, you can give your parting shots. Once again, please remember to fill the evaluation form. It's in the Q&A session. Yes, thank you. Lurit, take it away.
Okay, so first I just want to say thank you so much for being able to be part of this conversation. What we've covered on this call today may not be the whole blueprint of advocacy communications, but it's an entry point to understand how we need to do this, how we need to think about our role in communicating, and trying to advocate for different causes that we have. The biggest challenge I'm going to give each and every one of you is, what are you advocating for and why are you advocating for it? That will determine how far you want to go with testing advocacy strategies and advocacy communication processes in this whole dimension. But we live in an age where partnership is very important, ally formation is very important, and using even the digital sphere is important. But as you think about those, never take away the voice of your real beneficiary. Because 3/4 of the time, you might be the advocate, but you won't always be the direct beneficiary. So make sure that your direct beneficiary comes first in your messaging, and then everything else can fall in place as you keep going. Remember that technical jargon is going to hurt your advocacy process, so always look for simplified versions of the same. And that's why even within our countries, we see popular versions coming up of different things that people are coming up with. The last part is really, Sharon, I think in future, the conversation on advocacy communications can even be a series where we try and break it down according to different sectors. We try and break it down according to different countries and try to do comparative analysis of what has worked in one country, whether it can be replicated, whether it can't be replicated. But in the process, I want to invite all of you to interact with the work that we do. Feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn, Twitter, whichever it is. A policy o'clock is growing by the day and giving space for people to understand different strategies differently and also trying to engage differently. Feel free to also engage with the Youth for Tax Justice Network. You'll see a lot about advocacy comms, tested and tried models that you can replicate anywhere as much as possible. Beyond that is the last thing to say that sometimes what works in one country may not work in another, but it's important to understand your context before you try out any kind of advocacy communications strategy so that your messages are correct. So understand the context you operate in, but also try to make sure that you're centering it to the magnitude of how a problem is going on. And lobby is also important because you want interest groups to support you as well. So this has been a great evening, and I hope we're able to do this again. To now have Mastering Advocacy Communications Round 2 as a panel discussion, even with Jacqueline and everybody who's coming up. The next chat that I'd want to have with all of you should begin with experience sharing from all of you, and then the second part can now be the mastering part of the conversation. Overall, thank you and have a lovely evening, morning, wherever you are.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Lurit. That was such a rich conversation. I mean, and of course, we are having a physical event very soon on the last Saturday of November. Please ensure you come on board. And of course, Lurit will be there. All our speakers, if not most, if not all of our speakers will be there. and it's happening in Kenya. So please start looking for your passport and, you know, your boarding passes. And you're going to have this amazing conversation physically, and we're going to talk about it. And of course, Lurit, you're going to have a mastering advocacy communication series, because as you were talking, I was like, there's a lot to unpack from this, and one session is not enough, and we really need to think about it. I know Tonana, you might attempt. For those who don't understand things, I've said I'll just see her behind the tent so that we have this conversation again. And of course, bring some more and amazing conversations about this. And I'm 100% sure we're going to have a panel discussion on the same. And this is a wide topic. It's something that all organizations need, especially people in the development space. We all need to master advocacy. We all need to master lobbying. So at what point do we lobby? At what point do we advocate? You know, yeah. And it's been an amazing session, honestly. And I'm so glad each and every person could make it. And right about now, allow me to, everyone can put their cameras on, and then we can take a group selfie. You can take the group selfie, send it to your to the WhatsApp group, tag us, send in your LinkedIn, in your Instagram, Twitter, all your social media handles, and tag us. So let's do this. I can't see your cameras on. Please turn on your cameras so that we take a group selfie.
And remember to mark the 9th of November.
Yeah, 29th of November. Please mark it in your calendar. We're going to have a physical event. I have seen, I don't know what Kevin from Botswana will do.
Kevin will want to be.
But Kevin from Botswana, I think you should start saving up for your passports. And of course, invite us to your countries. We'll definitely come. We'll definitely come and have these conversations at your doorstep. So in case you want to have this conversation with us, of course, invite us to your countries. We'll definitely show up. And let me see again. So the details are going to be sent out about the upcoming physical event, and we'll just keep you posted.
Yeah,
I can see all of you. Can see Rose Spoker. Thank you for joining. I can see Shana. Can see Mercy. Yeah, please turn on your cameras and let's do this together. Okay. Okay. Also help me to take the selfies because there are so many pages. I don't know if I'll be able to go through all of this.
Okay, so what should we say? Advocacy communication.
Yeah, but I can. You just turn on your cameras. I'll see you, and also from your end you can take the cell. You can screenshot. So basically, I'm doing that. Yeah, Cameroon people, Ghana people, Nigerian people. I can see all of you here. I am really hoping this thing is saving because I've taken so many of them. Okay, one more time. Yeah, I can see. I really wanted to see Kevin. Kevin, please put on your what is it called? Your video on. I mean your page. I can see Kevin. I can see Kumbi Zai. You know these names. There's a way you. Hi, good to see you. I can see Jade, Solomon, Simon Peter. Good to see all of you here. Let me see where I am. It's very hot. It's getting very hot. Okay, nice. It's always so good to have all of you here. I know some of you are sleeping. Yeah, I think I'm done now. Also, feel free to share all of your screenshots with me in the groups. Tag us, talk about the session, and of course, remember to fill the evaluation form. And right about now, here, let me close at that. I can see someone is saying this is a much needed topic and our facilitator did justice to it. Thank you so much, Lurit. Yes, you really did. You really did justice very calmly, but very firm. That was awesome. It was amazing. So ensure you fill the evaluation form so that we are able to mark your attendance and more so for the certificate. And right about this time, allow me to close. I know we've gone a little bit, 20 minutes, but I know it was worth it. Thank you so much for joining. Have a lovely morning, evening, or afternoon. See you in the next one. In 25th? Yes, 25th of September, and we will be talking about crisis management and crisis and reputational management. See you all. Good night.
Thank you.
Bye.
All right, bye.
Bye.